It's a pleasure to sit with the Honorable Minister. Let me start with the politics of steel. Maybe it can give us some clarity and probably present the huge challenge that the Honorable Minister will need to be facing going forward. Steel didn't just happen to Nigeria. There was a deliberate program in 1958, before we even got independence, for us to look for a way, an industrial pathway that could be able to make us an industrial nation in the shortest possible time. And in that 1958 agreement, it was now agreed that it was only steel, that if we were able to build a steel plant for Nigeria, that we were going to be one of the fastest growing economies. Why this background is important is that it helps you to appreciate, the challenges, because I'm sure that as we drill down, we're going to be asking one question: how come after all these years, every minister comes and says he's going to do this and nothing is happening? Now, in trying to look for that program to happen, the Nigerian government practically went around the whole world and didn't get any help until they got to Russia. But the truth and the interesting part of this story is that the moment Russia agreed that they could build a steel plant for Nigeria, the European Investment Bank, within 2 years, funded the another steel plant in Delta. So that was when
Abuja, perhaps.
Beautiful. But in understanding steel, the Honorable Minister said that steel is the bedrock of development, that industrialization. But in real fact, steel is development and development is steel. Okay? There is nothing you can do in development without steel. And if you look at those countries that had gone from 0 to 100, like in the Middle East, what they did was that they increased their consumption of steel. China became, the world's biggest economy, okay, by just, focusing on their steel sector. They started producing infrastructure, making infrastructure faster than they could make a milkshake. Now let's get back to Nigeria so that we can get a perspective to this, Victor. When Ajokuta came, there were 3 other plants that came with Ajokuta. So the whole idea was Ajokuta was supposed to be a basic industries facility, not necessarily a steel plant, but had steel plants in it. One of the components of Ajokuta, which is why people keep talking about this 2% of Ajokuta that is not completed, is actually that 2%, it's more operational than it is technical. All right? Remember that the minister had mentioned liquid steel. So the whole idea is liquid steel. Liquid steel is the secret, okay, behind steel production. And what we have in Nigeria was a plant, or is a plant, that could be back integrated, to do 5.6 million metric tons of liquid steel. And then turn those things into billets that will now be rolled into steel products in the 4 rolling plants. Ajokuta, the one in Katsina, Batagrawa, the one in Jos, the one in Oshobo, and then the one in Alaja. So if you don't have this full picture, you might not understand, the challenges that the Honorable Minister and his team are actually facing, okay, in trying to get this thing right. Because everybody says, okay, fine, good talk, but how come it's not happening? Now, the question of liquid steel is now where your raw materials now come into play. The Honorable Minister had mentioned the National Steel Raw Materials Exploration Agency, which was established specifically to look for steel, search for steel raw materials. That was their job. And they had done a lot of job in the days. But with the enactment of the Ministry of Mines and Steel, a lot of things have changed, which if you don't look more deeply, you can't be able to see them. There are a lot of now fault lines that are now happening. The first fault line is that you no longer have the National Steel Raw Material Exploration Agency as an exclusive agency that can go to anywhere and look for raw materials for steel and stockpile them. You now have a ministry that needs to issue licenses, okay, and that ministry is not under the purview and control of the Honorable Minister. Fault line number 1. Now, you have another agency, that is called the Nigerian Geological Survey Agency.
Yes.
That is also not under the control or purview of the Honorable Minister. Fourth line number, to remember that we're trying to link this to liquid steel. Because the moment the Honorable Minister gets investors, the first question they're going to ask him is, how are you going to be assuring us, okay, on the sustainability of the supply of raw materials? Are you following me?
Yeah.
But in the areas that he has enumerated, like the light mill, you don't need liquid steel to be able to run the light mill, which he's ready and willing to run, you know, very quickly. But if we're going to be going through the whole value chain, okay, of the steel industry, he had mentioned, you know, 3 agencies that are very critical. Now, for me, one of the most important there will be the NTA. Now, the NTA is called the Meteorological Training Institute that was donated to Nigeria by the German government in the 60s, equipped. What was that institute supposed to be doing? It was supposed to now be developing the human capital required to be able to now run, you know, the value process of the steel industry, meaning exploration, metallurgy, et al. And again, it's important you note that the steel industry or the mine industry is broken into 3 broad perspectives that are very, very synergized. What you call the minerals, the metals, and then the steel. Now, if you have a delink, albeit even by way of policy, like I'm trying to say now, because for the Honorable Minister to assure that we're going to be getting 5.6 million tons of liquid steel, he will be requiring to get a minimum of 15 million metric tons of raw materials of 7 different minerals into Ajokuta. Now, that's a logistical nightmare. Okay?
You know,